Thank you so much. I really am grateful for this invite because just like many other people, I've been in my home and I live alone. So it's become quite kind of eerie. I just meet myself coming and going, and I'm tired of my own company, truly. So um, I want to, there's, I'm sort of a little, where shall I start? I want to sum up a little bit of what I've been doing. So when I met Michelle and some of you other lovely people, my life had really been changed a great deal by Katrina. I was deeply connected to New Orleans because I'm Cajun, and I had 13 relatives living in New Orleans before Katrina, and spent many days of my childhood in New Orleans with relatives on vacation and so forth, and then had relatives all along I-10 from Houston to New Orleans, also impacted by Katrina. So it was Katrina that, and the failure of the levees in New Orleans, that taught me the first of the 13 things that I share about wisdom in disasters. That's no one is coming. And I think before Katrina, we had an operating theory that said we had built institutions the equal of whatever disaster might befall us, so that if things became completely overwhelming to us, something occurred that exceeded our resources and abilities to respond, that these institutions would arrive with all the resources necessary to help us get on our feet again. And King Lake had a huge impact on me because when I arrived, at first the welcome was so generous, and you all are quite gracious. You're learners, and I deeply respect that, but I was a beneficiary of it because by asking me, it compelled me to think through what I had learned in Katrina, and then to kind of curate that for what should be shared. And I remember being in King Lake and having a discussion about the stages that follow when the unthinkable has happened. So I had really just begun to write about those stages when I came to see you all, and prevailed upon you, imposed on you actually, to say, do these make sense to you? And what was what was really powerful about the moment of being with you all is here were two communities very far apart, very, very different in terms of geography, ecology, industry, demography, two very different places, King Lake and New Orleans. But in both places, people had experienced the unthinkable, had become shipwrecked by an event that outstripped everyone's expectations and anticipations of what could occur. And in both places, what struck me is that we knew this could happen. I mean, you all, I'm trying to clean up my language and not say y'all, but you do know what that means. You haven't forgotten, right? Okay. So y'all know about fire, and you understand fire, and you have this relationship to the land that considers the environment much more, the natural environment, much more than we do where I'm from. So it wasn't as if you didn't know there could be a fire, but the magnitude and the horror of it and the extent to which it devastated your community made me feel this huge sense of solidarity. So it put me on a path to look for, to pursue those places where the unthinkable had happened, and then to continue chronicling what people and communities did in the aftermath. And it was that path and the pattern of behavior that occurs in the aftermath. And I call them stages as a linguistic convenience, not to be interpreted as steps that one must take, but a sort of a collection of the states of mind that exist at the individual and community level. And so with that, I went on. My hurricane experience in this region, starts when I was very young, but as a professional, we had Allison, Katrina, Rita, Ike, Harvey, Imelda. I mean, these are all fairly catastrophic storms that struck my community, my home in one way or another. And then in addition to that, I began looking at the patterns of what happened when in other forms of displacement. So I said, basically, war or weather, loss of health or wealth cast us up on unfamiliar shores, and then we have to organize a way forward. We have to rethink our lives. We have to begin again. What does that look like? So I wanted to tell you a little of that story because I'm still on that journey. And after leaving Baker Ripley, which was a real Texas-sized $300 million, 71 location, 1,800 staff operation that I worked for 30 years to build. After leaving, I left so that I could pursue and study what we're like after we're shipwrecked and we're forced to rethink our lives, our communities, our cities. And so that journey took me from, Houston to Johannesburg, and Johannesburg to Berlin, and to Hamburg, and then to Lebanon and Bogota and Puerto Rico, and numerous other cities, and Detroit when it was flat on its back from economic devastation. So I went to study those places where there had been enormous destructive upheaval, war or weather, loss of health or wealth, to examine more closely what we're like when our backs are against the wall and we have to rebuild our lives out of our own imaginations. So at that point, I was noticing this, that our first response to a threat, to destruction, to the unthinkable, is to seek some sort of safety. And I'll compare it, I'll try to bring in this virus situation as well as the other storms and destruction that we've all been through. But our first thing is, can we seek some kind of safety? We look for higher ground. In this case, we're all hunkered down in a famous Texas saying. I think I really appreciate Australians. You immediately caught on to the value of hunker down, and you're real good at it. And I tell your story everywhere because I'll hunker down for a hurricane, but I think it takes a special kind of guts to hunker down for a fire. So you've made an impression on me in that respect. But this hunkering down, this seeking of safety, is our first reaction to threat. What comes next is a kind of desperate desire for sanctuary. Safety is just the immediate higher ground. We're still exposed. We're still vulnerable. We just want to survive. And that survival phase is just a desperate move. Whatever it takes is our thought, so that we can stand upright again. Then we move into kind of the seeking of sanctuary. We found higher ground, but we still exposed. And where can we find some form of temporary safety? Right now, we're all holed up in our homes, but very often, in the aftermath of a storm, that looks like a shelter. Some of you may know that I was called on to organize a mass shelter in Harvey for 10,000 people, and we were tasked to do that in as quickly as possible and ended up setting the whole thing up in less than 8 hours. So it a bit takes my breath away still to think about it. It was intense and it was exhausting, and it was still raining, and we had already run through every shelter that was available, and many of the buildings that had been designated shelters had themselves gone underwater. So within a few hours, on the anniversary of Katrina during Harvey, we opened a mass shelter for 10,000 people. And as they began arriving from all along the coast in Texas, and many from shelters that had been washed out, we welcomed them to the shelter in over 89 languages. So it was a source of great pride to us that we understood who our neighbors really were, and we prepared for them with cots and food and a welcome in their own language. So the initial inflow of people was even with all of my work in community development and all I know about economic injustice and inequities, it still took my breath away to see people arrive from some of the communities we serve, because I knew the conditions of the places they were coming from before the water rose. So this sanctuary that we created, this temporary shelter, the focus we had at that moment was to stand it up in a fashion that would insist upon really respect and the dignity of people arriving. I remembered from Katrina the circumstances of people being referred to as refugees in their own country, a completely inappropriate term, and then also characterized as victims and referred to in all kinds of ways that separated those of us who hadn't gone underwater from the people who had. So from the beginning, I insisted that the only two words that we could use to refer to the people in the shelter were neighbor or guest. And I insisted upon that to such a degree and with such Texas woman ferocity, because we, have that other side. We show up and we have our makeup on and we fix our hair because that's a requirement. And, we always try to look nice and speak politely and be gracious until you exceed the limits of our patience. And then you get the other side. So I had to explain it in words that everyone could understand. But ultimately, it became the norm for how everyone in that arena, in that 400,000 square foot shelter, referred to people, guests or neighbors. And language and words really matter. And that insistence, and then the front door meeting people as if they were guests, helping them carry their things, escorting them, not treating them as if we had to examine them, to be welcoming. It really mattered. So I think when we are thinking about disasters, this notion of sanctuary, that what we create to actually help people feel safe, temporarily safe, as a temporary refuge, it needs to have the features, the best of community development work needs to be reflected in it. And when it was stood up, all the officials who came to visit said, "This is incredible. Every shelter should look like this. Every shelter should be run like this. How did you know how to do this?" And I said, well, decades of community development work and welcoming and respecting and honoring people as they show up. This is our habit. So these are the habits that really need to be on display after disaster, the habits of welcome and respect and dignity, the restoration of dignity. So there's the safety and survival, and then sanctuary. And what comes next in terms of stages is really quite a difficult stage. And it was a woman in Lower Ninth, in Lakeview in New Orleans that actually made me aware of what this was like. And we're all in it now. It's called limbo. We can't go back, but we don't know what forward looks like. And this state of suspension actually is tremendously significant and enormously exhausting. So I want to speak about limbo for a minute, because it both in terms of, bless you, both in terms of what we tell ourselves, what we tell ourselves about it, and then what it looks like to others. So when it comes to safety and survival, these are all things we both know what to do. What is our priority for safety and survival? Be alive when it's done. And if someone's standing next to us and can help, it's clear what the priority is. In Sanctuary, I've spoken, it's about dignity and welcome and honoring the people that come. In limbo, it's quite complicated because there's a lot going on that we can't see. And right now it's never been as intense as it is now. Now we're living in a disaster where the camera can't pan the street and show you the destruction. We literally can't see the people that are sick and struggling to breathe, and most of the people going bankrupt and having catastrophic economic disasters in their own lives and the lives of their companies. That's invisible to us. It's behind four walls. It's the plummeting bank account and the disappearing retirement. And in the US, it's particularly dire because our notion of a safety net is, it's a lot of holes and not much net. So, and in Houston right now, which some of you may applaud, is also a plummeting price of oil has meant thousands of people that normally come to the aid of less fortunate folks in these times are without jobs as well. And so limbo means we're trapped in an in-between, and we're not clear about what's next, and it's exhausting. We're coming to terms with a massive amount of new information, and this is a good time to mention that whatever negative, tragic, horrible things have happened, and however badly you might see people behave, and however devastating the headlines, remember, reality is on the ground, not in the headlines. Something like 80% of the people in the world agreed to make sacrifices in the interest of their own and their neighbors' health and well-being. And I'm pretty sure if 2 months ago I had been with all of you and I had said, 2 months from now, 80% of the world will agree to make social, emotional, spiritual, and economic sacrifices in the interest of their health and the health of their neighbors, you'd have said, that woman's a lunatic. She's from Texas. What do you expect? So let's never forget that we are able to do it, and we've demonstrated it. And we all had to learn a great deal in the last few weeks, right? You're exhausted. You've all become amateur epidemiologists, and now you're flattening curves, and you're understanding disease spread, and you know about droplets, and you know this mask and that mask and all the rest. You didn't know any of that 2 months ago. Perhaps some of you are health experts. Most of us knew very little. So limbo is exhaustion from all of that. You're taking in the full measure of what's occurred, and you're realizing just how big it is and how different things will be. I'm realizing that now. I'm realizing that whatever plans and assumptions I had for 2020 and 2021 to be gently set aside. It's like it ain't happening. So now so there was a woman in Lakeview, and her husband actually worked in the dome through the storm when Katrina hit. And she was one of the lucky ones that managed to get a trailer early on. And she had one of the few internet links in the whole community of Lakeview. And so she decided to take that trailer. Instead of living in it, she made it a community center. This is what reminds me again and again, no matter what happens, I think one of the first things you rebuilt in King Lake was the community center. And I think this is a universally understood thing about, for those of us who work in community, it's our desperate need to come together. But she said that my husband and I are just mowing the grass between the curb and the sidewalk, basically just a few feet in the front. We don't have the energy to do the whole thing, but it's just our way of saying we're still here. So in limbo, if you feel exhausted, if there are days when you can hardly imagine how to do the simplest thing, it's because you're preparing for what's next. And Texas has fast forwarded to what's next, and the next stage is upheaval. And it's where we go back, we try to go back to normal life, and we are not yet clear about which of the things that we used to do are still feasible versus the things that are gone for good. We see it after storms as people try to reconcile the past with a new future that they've not built and don't understand. So in limbo, one important bit of work to do now is this is where asset-based community and individual development come in handy, is to be a real student of what's working, to look at your own strengths, resources, assets, financial, professional, relational, social, all of that. Make sure. I got pretty unsettled a couple of weeks ago, and I took my own advice and sat down and said, you know, what do you have to work with? Who are you connected to? What is the foundation that you're going to use to restart your life? Because it's going to be different after this. It's going to be different. So what's going to be the foundation? And so in limbo, you can't do much. And in upheaval, almost everything that would be normally difficult becomes impossible, versus the things that would be hard, would be easy, now become hard. I had to go to the bank. It required an appointment and an elaborate set of arrangements with the bank officer. And so we find ourselves, after we move out of this limbo, with constant frustration because we're tied to the habits of the past, which we continue to try to practice, only they don't quite work. So upheaval is where you see people losing it. You know, they're getting angry. They go down to the taco stand and they're furious that they can't get a taco at a taco truck without a mask, and they act out. Or we find our friends just in their homes crying all the time, not doing anything. So just these states of mind, really, the safety and sanctuary and limbo and upheaval, really precede the phase when we accept the new realities. Upheaval is all about getting a handle on what they are. You know, I have this mask and I despise it already. I have an attitude toward it. I have an attitude. Not that the virus or the mask give a shit about my attitude, but each time I put it on, I do so with this, I can't believe I have to do this. And I'm not proud of this, but it's my attitude. We find we're going to have a lot of attitudes. I went to the grocery store and they started telling me, stand here, do that, move here, get behind this, pay, move up. And I was pissed off. I'm thinking, look, I come here, you guys are friendly. I know most of the people there. I usually go collect some hugs up and down the aisle. All of a sudden, like people are bossing me around. And it it was just a horrible experience. So we have to be prepared for upheaval, and you're going to get mad and frustrated. And I wasn't always, I'm not always my most gracious in that phase of disaster. One time, there was a news story about Mayor White, who was in office in Houston when Ike hit, and they wrote a story about him swearing. And the reporter called me and said, "What do you think about your mayor? He told the debris removal people to get the fucking trucks on the street and get going. What do you think about that?" I said, "I think if you weren't swearing, you weren't working," because everything was hard. Everything was hard. And I think we need to be prepared that reopening does not mean rebooting our previous life. Many people have proposed ambitiously that perhaps when we restart, we can do it without some of the things that we shouldn't bring forward. It's just like in disasters. People constantly say after the hurricane, can we rebuild better? Can we create things? Can we build things out of materials that aren't so water hating? In Houston, that would be a wise thing. Can we rethink the inequities that have a foundation, a literal built foundation? Can we rethink those, build differently coming out of this? And the answer is sometimes. But often what we will see more likely are some incremental and not insignificant, but incremental changes more than a wholesale shift. Partly because we're exhausted by what we just came through. It's quite challenging to come out of upheaval and acceptance and then start building in some brand new frame of mind. But it is very possible for us to look at what we're responsible for, the resources, assets, and power we have, and within that, try to recreate something different than what we went into this with. So it's a matter of, and I don't mean shrinking your aspiration, but it's shrinking your field of vision so that it's focused clearly on where you can make the most difference. So you take the energy and assets you have and you address your arena. That coming out of limbo to upheaval to acceptance, and then moving into kind of taking stock of where I can make a difference. That's the foundation for a new way of working, living, etc. I want to say something about acceptance. I've already confessed to my attitude and the fact it's obvious to you, I'm sure, that I swear, and I think, it's my coping mechanism. I'm getting too old to drink martinis, so swearing, that's my go-to. But when you come to acceptance, it's really a fork in the road. So you're talking about a state of mind that says, I wouldn't wish this virus on anyone. It's a terrible thing. The hurricane's terrible. The failure of the levees is terrible. And in the US right now, we can actually embrace rage because we have plenty of people to blame things on. I'm tempted to tell you a joke, a Trump joke, but I'll wait. Okay, we can embrace rage and just spend our time churning up outrage, or we can embrace despair and say, we're doomed, it's the end of times, that's the end of democracy, the US is a failed state. I will never embrace those paths, never. Because we don't know. You could not have predicted this virus, nor that 80% of the people in the world would agree to work together to do something about it. So you don't really know. So rage and despair, that path, I reject it. The other path says, for whatever reason, this is where we are. We're a flawed, stumbling, crazy, beautiful, amazing cruel and destructive species. All of those things are true at once. And this is where we are right now. These are the resources, strengths, and assets we have right now. And it's the right now of a path of acceptance that I think has great power. In those 13 things where I say, do what you can with what you have, where you are right now. That every time I feel lost and empty or alone or fearful or enraged, that grounds me. Do what I can with what I have, where I am right now. So we are unique. We are the only species that actually creates a life out of our own imagination. We build it, we design it, we choose it. It's a powerful part of being human. It's what makes us all of the things I said before: wonderful, creative, destructive, cruel, intriguing, ingenious, etc. The one thing I strongly advise against, okay, this is one, I have to tell you one funny thing, and then over to you. Galveston, after I go down to Galveston after Ike, utter destruction, total mess. So, and it's an island, sort of a barrier island, but it's just more like a punching bag island now for climate change, right? So I see this bar, and on the outside of the bar, it's an old bar, old Galveston bar. Galveston's a party place, right? So, people just, ride out storms there and have a ball. But somebody had hand painted a sign on the outside of the bar because the old one had been washed away, and it said, "Hard Times and Misery Saloon." So, one thing we don't want to do is move into the Hard Times and Misery Saloon. Climb up on a bar stool, whine about our circumstances, talk endlessly about the failures of the people in leadership positions, complain about our difficult lives, because all of the people, we descended from all the people before us that survived all the wars and genocides and the plagues and the disasters and so forth. So we're here for a reason. And just avoid that Hard Times and Misery Saloon. All right, over to you guys.